because there's so much that encompasses architecture, feeding that desire to do beautiful work, put our stamp on the world. So while anybody can get a real estate license, to be successful and maintain a primary profession is extremely difficult.
The 2008 financial crisis had a devastating impact on the architecture industry, with many talented architects losing their jobs and numerous projects being shelved. However, in the midst of this disruption, a new opportunity emerged in the world of real estate. Low interest rates, increasing demand for housing, and innovative financing options created a fertile ground for enterprising individuals to make their mark in the industry. One such individual was Santiago Aceves, a talented architect who saw the potential to bring a fresh perspective to the world of real estate, founding the Aceves Group.
Hello and welcome to Architecture Beyond. I'm your host, Brandon Aaron Gibbs, founder of the course platform Iamthestudio and director of Studio Motion Forum. Architecture Beyond is an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their design and creativity gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This is our first series of episodes, so I hope you enjoy our guests and stories. Be sure to listen to the end for your opportunity of connecting with Architecture Beyond. Then we're interviewing today with architect turned real estate agent and guru for land, Santiago Aceves. And thank you and for coming here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Brandon.
I guess could you share a little bit of your story, sort of how did you get started with architecture, and then how did that transition over to that world of real estate?
What happened was my passion's been architecture. So I attended undergraduate here in the United States at Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the University of New Mexico. And then I took a year out to work with a commercial firm, thinking that would help me to solidify choices for graduate school. That prepared me some time to get my portfolio together. Then we got a chance to go to school together at the Architecture Association in London, which was wonderful. But the intention was always to be in architecture. And as economic circumstances turned out, this was after the kind of the great economic downturn of 2008. So this is leading into 2009, leaving the AA to pursue other architectural endeavors before ultimately going back into finishing my master's here in Albuquerque at the University of New Mexico again for my master's in architecture. But at that time, there was only one firm here locally that was able to hire. They had enough work that was about it. So it was a dramatic economic change from where I was used to, because I was bartending through grad school and earning a certain lifestyle. I was also expecting my first child. So it was more of an economic need to pursue other paths with the intention of coming back into architecture. But I think ultimately what it did is it afforded me the chance to open my mind up to what other opportunities there may be. And real estate seemed like a viable component to satisfy what I needed to do, provide for my family, at the same time also keep some of those skill sets that I've learned with architecture, it's training and schooling in kind of active. So I was able to get into real estate fairly quickly. The requirements to actually get a license aren't as strenuous anywhere close to that as we're used to with architecture school or presentations. And but it was fun, and then I got a chance to even kind of experience what it's like, because I remember hearing very negative things about what realtors were like. So I thought, if anything, I could bring in something fresh and new to that profession with my background in architecture.
Could you tell us more about the thoughts about sort of the architecture market, maybe when you were in high school or when you were saying, hey, what you were interested in, because ideas, a lot of people don't know about the actual architecture market. It's like, even they get to school and you don't know about it till the final. Could you tell us more about that place from before and then that place afterwards?
So, yeah, absolutely. So, someone who's always been drawn to architecture and creative spaces. And so in high school, it was cool. You're really only taking drafting classes. So you're kind of learning to refine kind of your drawing skills. And it just seemed like it was kind of inching you along. And I think at that point we're exploring, international architecture. For someone like me in Albuquerque, we don't have a lot of contemporary or modern architecture. So it was always aspiring to see architecture like that, or to at some point, create architecture like that. So it put me on a path of kind of exploration of spaces and ideas. School here, which was at least in Albuquerque, one of the things that I think was very impressive for me was a lot of our professors came from Columbia. And at the time, Columbia was kind of highly notarized for a tremendous skill set of graduating architects. They were doing very well financially, in creating their own small studios, and that seemed to be a boom at the time. So it seemed like there was an opportunity there to kind of break from this kind of paradigm of working your way up through the ranks. It seemed like some very young and kind of exciting architects were breaking into the field very quickly. So that was part of that idea of like, we can do this. I can work hard, strive hard, and hopefully become a accomplished architect quickly. Obviously that's very different from maybe reality for most of us. I think most of us in the architecture field realize it's a lot of work and grinding and working your way up and learning a lot. And there's reasons for those delays, I think, because there's so much that encompasses architecture. But it's exciting at the same time too. You're feeding that desire to do beautiful work, to make something substantial or significant, put our stamp on the world. So I think that that was the exciting part. It was this fresh opportunity.
So what's a commonly held belief that is about real estate that you passionately disagree with?
So one of the things that's about real estate that I passionately disagree with is that, it's a very easy field to get into. The truth of it is, yes, the testing and the classes, it's only a few months worth of classes, and that you're basically taking 2 exams, one national exam and one state exam, where you'll be licensed as a realtor. However, the actual profession of being a realtor, having a licensed real estate, selling it is very, very difficult. I mean, it's a combination, it's a hodgepodge of a lot of skill sets. The most, kind of significant part of that is sales. So it's commission based only. So similar to an architecture firm having to go out and build its business, right, to actually acquire new clients. So there's some parallels with that. And then it's personality management. So we're dealing with a number of different people involved in a single transaction. At any given time, the simplest transaction is going to require at least 15 people. So it's a lot of communication back and forth. Again, very akin to maybe project management for a property. So the things that I disagree with is that, it's such an easy thing. We can just go in and make a lot of money, and it's, anybody can do it. I think that while anybody can get a real estate license, to be successful and to maintain as your primary profession is extremely difficult. And I am adamant about mentoring new brokers and realtors coming into the field to understand that it is a strenuous and time-consuming obligation. It's a full-time job in the sense, not 40 hours a week. Your full-time job, you're 7 days a week, 365 days a year until other milestones are reached in the profession. But it is a full-on grind every day.
That grind, can you sort of elaborate about the grind? And also say, what have you learned since transitioning into real estate?
Yeah, part of that grind is, with the intention of having a set schedule of staying consistent. So that grind is waking up in the morning, whether it's, reading, meditating, getting set for the day, reviewing the schedule that you have for the day before. So you're prepared at each stage. So we're working on maintaining a business that we've built. We're working on growing a business every day, because once you finish one project, there's no guarantee that you have the next client coming in the door. So there's constant need for searching and building every day. It's constant need for maintaining and exercising what is needed per transaction basis. Each transaction has its own set of unique parameters that we're following. So it's a nonstop, focus throughout the day, and it's welcoming because at the same time too, that's rewarding. We're working with challenges, and I think as architects, we we pride ourselves more on maybe problem solving than anything else. So a lot of those skill sets, from architecture school, from the profession, play very well into real estate for that matter. And I think have given me a strong benefit of how to address these issues, how to address the day, and how to continue knowing that, we can see the overall perspective of each of those transactions and each of these, requirements going forward.
How would you describe the Aceves Group? Because you started like 8 to 10 years ago. Where would you say you are now, and sort of how did you came about to create the Aceves Group?
Sure. So, I drawing a lot of parallels from architecture, but in architecture, we're kind of learned to be the leader, kind of take control of a project or design, and be accountable. And so when I entered into the real estate profession, it's a very individual based profession. So you're with yourself basically to motivate yourself, to push yourself. And again, all those are key elements of a deliberate architect, right? And so getting in the profession and starting to build up the business, I realized that there's a lot of people who were kind of shy about the pursuit of that as a business endeavor. And so I was able to create the Aceves Group with the idea that, hey, if I could take control and help show you the path to hopefully being successful in business as pertaining to real estate, I would enjoy that as a growth for myself. And I also have the opportunity to obviously create a larger team that can help service more clients. And so the idea is that we had a common idea, a common direction. We could have a group of people all striving for a kind of a mutual goal at the same time as their individual goals. The more businesses we can get, underneath their belt, the stronger they become, the better they become. So in essence, all ships sailing the same direction, and we're all become successful. So the Aceves Group just is kind of an evolving business group of real estate professionals moving forward in the sense of always wanting to better ourselves, better our skill sets, and create a business that's going to be sustainable.
What is like the typical size of group to, I guess, get a deal done, or that typical workflow? Like how many people, and how does it start?
It starts with conversations. So it's I can't say there's actually a formula for how to get momentum, but no, of course. So the Aceves Group, what we do is a start to finish kind of luxury white glove service. So the process of buying real estate can be very common sense, just not common knowledge. So what our job is to achieve is to create the trust in our clients to understand that we can break things up in the process very deliberately where they can understand it. It doesn't seem so overwhelming. So each one of myself and the people in the group will deliberately address the concerns and questions that are immediately pertinent for that client and the stage of that transaction. So we know we always keep their attention. We're not losing them. And it's very similar to project management in the architectural field or presenting an architectural project. We can be very pragmatic and systematic about how we address issues or we address the overall scope of the project. So the idea is we remind them what the overall goal is, what the overall achievement will become, and then break it up into digestible pieces. And I think the better we understand that whole entire process, the easier it is for us to communicate. If you understand something very well, you can speak very simply about it. We at the Aceves Group make sure that each of our clients has a very strong understanding of where we are in the transaction, what is being required of them at that moment, and what the next couple of steps will be. And before we know it, we've completed the transaction. They're very happy, and they've never felt overwhelmed because in anything that's significant that takes time, similar to building a project, there's a very long timeline that's established, and there can be a number of issues that come up. So our ability to look down the road, foresee any potential issues, try to mitigate any of those, or at least create a backup plan should something go sideways. The philosophy can always be if this, then that. So very similar to architecture and things we've learned in the architecture field is that if we can anticipate something possibly coming up to interfere with our initial timeline, we have time to kind of mitigate that or at least avoid that potential issue well in advance. And then should something happen, well, we already have a plan in place. So we're not being completely just reactive. We're being proactive in our approaches.
What skills don't translate over? And do you miss some of those skill sets? Do you miss doing some things you did as an architect that you don't do as a real estate?
Yeah, one of the things that maybe does not translate over into real estate that I do miss itself is that, when we're creating a project, we're at the helm. So we know there's parameters. We're looking how we can put all those facets together, in a way that makes sense, can be affordable, can be beautiful, but that's kind of our choice of direction. I miss that because in real estate, we usually don't get that. We're told exactly what house, to look at or what type of houses to look at most of the time. A lot of times our clients are very particular about their wants and needs. So we're just addressing their needs and their concerns. And depending on how open-minded they are, we can be very restricted and almost move back to just more of a transactional cooperator, if you will, coordinator of the transaction for them. So I miss that ability to kind of take a little more controls, like, hey, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I think this is actually something that you may be more interested in. One of the things that does sometimes apply is that sometimes we have a client that, depending on their situation, they want this ultimate idea for a home, for their new home, and we just can't afford it. Because of economics, because of their loan type, they're just not able to do it. So one of the things that I do love about architecture I bring into my practice as a realtor is that we can say, hey, if we know you want these things, we have a budget to work with. We can incorporate a design budget, the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, get you exactly what you want, and just be more practical about it. We know there's going to be some money coming in, and we can design that ideal home for you or necessary spaces, is a future plan. So that skill set I love, and I really do enjoy that. But I don't miss about architecture is obviously there's a number of things, but
the critics,
the critics. You're never going to please somebody in totality. You're constantly fighting for each one of your design choices. You're on the hot seat all the time, and then sure enough. People rather celebrate your failures than your successes a lot of times. So it's a very complicated and competitive field. So my hat always goes off to the architects who are making it and breaking into the world and building their projects, because ultimately it's like, hey, did you see you had your vision, you had the gusto to do it, and you did it. You put something out there with your name on it. For all good and bad purposes, you did it. It itself is rewarding.
You're listening to Architecture Beyond, an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. Our guest today is architect turned real estate entrepreneur Santiago Aceves, who successfully developed his skills beyond the world of architecture to found the Aceves Group in the heart of New Mexico. This podcast is produced by Iamthestudio, a premium resource for training architecture and design professionals in the top industry software. If you need help with learning design software and techniques to a professional level, please follow the link on our page. I'll quickly share, and it might be part of this, maybe not. But when I was in graduate program, I just really liked taking photographs. And so I was taking photographs of everybody. I was taking photographs of Patrick Shoemaker, of Theos Rapopoulos, of the dean, and just sort of, these are the people who started the DRL, people who were leading the Architecture Association. And the idea was I was just taking pictures, and they said, oh, hey, that's cool, and I knew I started the blog for the DRL, and though it's not really continued now they're doing Instagram, and they're sort of having a little bit of that energy, but it was there was a big energy. Everyone was contributing, and we were separate from most of the programs. Right. So I don't know if you knew all that sort of that dynamic.
Well, I always looked at, because that was a program I wanted to go into. So if I would have continued at the AA, that was exactly where I wanted to go. So I had interest. I had personal interest of just following that blog and following you and following anybody who was in DRL. Because I think, not to say diminish anybody else's field there at the AA. But, I felt that, as an architect, design is the coolest thing for me. It seemed like you guys were on the frontier of pushing ideas, and that was itself, that exploration is, it's intoxicating. So I love sitting in on those lectures. I loved seeing those, presentations. And that was not secretly, but it was my passion to go into that direction.
Back to the sort of the second half.
Mhm.
What do you wish your younger self knew about architecture?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if I would go back and talk to my younger self who's starting out in the pursuit of an architectural field, is that, it's not to placate it, but it is a ladder rung type profession, right? So we're starting off at the very bottom, and the idea is when breaking into an architecture firm or working for a studio, it's you're going to start off at the bottom, and it's going to be a hard, grueling work that not anywhere close to your ideas or dreams of being the star architect designer are. And I think that's, for me, would be to say, hey, you've got to learn to grind through the smaller things. It's important to learn those lessons, learn how to do those things. And then, don't ever diminish your dream of being the designer. It's just the idea that there is going to be a process to getting to that point. And at the same time, too, I think don't let the school only dictate what you should be studying or learning about. I think that one thing we forget about is, we put so much emphasis on a school to direct us on a path, on a trajectory to becoming that desired architectural, endpoint. I think that, we should be pulling from all forms of sources and resources and colleagues from around the world along that point, because I think we'll learn more. I think more of a well-rounded approach into that field than just, staying in the same school, staying in the same location, really kind of more expanding kind of the idea of what architects are doing across the world.
You have to have this sort of mindset, not just this type, because maybe this type is where you please the professor, but the idea is like even some people that will be hired by the professor, but the idea is your value to the industry and to society is definitely not just following this one person, like these disciples of Le Corbusier. I know BV Doshi, I don't feel even that he was just trying to do everything Le Corbusier did. Like, in fact, the value of your best disciples are them going out and achieving something and separate. So, I agree with that. Which architects would you say have influenced you the most?
Sure. I think kind of I'll kind of hit it in different areas, because I think starting out, I didn't really know a lot of big name architects outside the U.S. So you heard about SOM was kind of big when I was an undergraduate, and some of the work they did with the Seattle Library, so that was like a cool idea of what modern architecture. And then we'd research things like postmodern from people from New York, so you had Eisenman and I'm trying to remember some old names. But there was a lot of emphasis on New York, right? So it was a lot of New York-based studios and
Daniel Libeskind.
Yes, Libeskind would be one of those high notoriety, and so that was like an undergraduate, and then getting into the chance to get into the AA, you started getting your eyes were opened up, and you got a chance to see people like Snow Hedda, and see that as a kind of a younger group come together and really kind of doing commercial projects, but looking at it in a fresh new way, and so that was exciting. But sometimes I learned to tie back my enjoyment of space. I thought sometimes the simple spaces were the most dynamic to me. So Tado Ando was always a kind of a hero of mine. He built very beautiful spaces, very monolithic, almost brutalistic style. But there was just some kind of lightness and creativity that really kind of inspired me, and that moved me toward Peter Zumthor. Reading his books were insightful, and those were kind of starting again to open me up again. The very, I think, pragmatic but beautiful designs, and seemed like they were the perfect place and perfect time. So they seemed a very intentional design for that space, and that maybe really kind of energized the idea of what good architecture should be. It should be deliberate and should have intention. Not just because you got awarded a large commission, and let's see what we can do. Not
Mhm.
not to say anything bad about those projects, but they just did not seem it could be placed anywhere in the world, right? It didn't seem to have to be significant to that location, and that seemed a little generic for me. Chipperfield is also one of those architects that I think has very beautiful designs, very rhythmic, that can be seen as being generic, but I think in the context of the city landscape and the locations, really add a nice underlying dynamic quality to it. So again, very purposeful, very intentional. There's also a lot of really young, rising stars that I think I also greatly admire as well. Names kind of escape me, but there's so many great architects out there right now. I think if anything, that's been the reassuring and the exciting part about architecture. The evolution of architecture has really been pushed a lot more in the last 10 years, I think, than the last 150.
It's really it says something bad about some of the last 150 years, though, in terms of how stagnant we started to go at the same time.
Well,
So
it's like, yeah. I mean, because you have the cathedrals, right? So then it's like, as the architectural historian, you're like, wow, I mean, that you put yourself in almost a place where, yeah, you can almost imagine the divinity that's infused in those buildings. It seems like they're touching the sky, pushing architecture, pushing engineering feats. And then it just seems like it kind of just dwindles down a little bit. We don't quite seem to reach that same magnificence. And then all of a sudden we have projects that are incredible, that are bringing in light and function and beauty. And but there was not to say anything bad, but it was definitely a darker age of architecture.
that made me think about there's a church in Arizona, the Catholic Church. I don't know if you've ever been, and it's pretty much a large cross. It's pretty much church chapel of the Holy Cross in Sedona,
Okay.
Arizona. I didn't know if you ever heard of that, but it's sort of out in a
I
little.
never have.
It's a little bit. It's Arizona. Arizona's a little bit like New Mexico in terms of climate, right? Or
Very
because
similar. Yeah.
that not like an ideal the architecture of New Mexico? I've learned about sort of Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Like you have like there's a unique style that's been developed out there. I just was
Mm.
just interested if you just sort of describe that a little bit and maybe even pitch.
Sure.
Well, if you were pitching New Mexico for people to come, sort of that real estate / architect, what sort of things would you
Sure.
say?
Well, what sells New Mexico is actually not the architecture; it's actually the landscape itself. I mean, it's we are a rural state. I mean, with all totality of population, I think we're less than 3 million people in the whole state. Arizona's got a more significant population because of Phoenix and Tucson, but we're more in Albuquerque itself is more in tune with the philosophies probably and the size of Tucson than with Phoenix. But what really would attract people and maybe come to New Mexico is that the indoor outdoor qualities we possess here. There's a strong sense of being outdoors, of participating outdoors. We've got over 300 days of sunshine, and very good communities. Elaborate on that. So we typically have parks, walking trails, biking trails. We can access mountains very quickly. So we have homes that are kind of situated along the foothills of the mountain. That's our backdrop to our city, and that really depending on how we orientate the windows and the homes themselves, it leads to some really beautiful vistas and opportunities to kind of bring that outside in to the buildings itself. And there's been a number of good builders, not architects, but builders have done that. We're a little shy on architects here in New Mexico, but one of the things that I think that is attractive about the building type is, and things like Santa Fe, I think why it makes it as a World Heritage Site, as well as a world destination for a lot of people. I think it's been the top 10 list for at least the last couple of decades. Is you have kind of a homogeneous style of architecture. It's a Pueblo style that's indigenous in design, but we've continued that flat roof design, stucco exterior, ephes exterior. So we do get a very simplistic but yet beautiful landscape with the architecture being placed on that site, and the color palettes themselves are very congruent with the climate here, as well as the color palette of the surroundings. So it becomes very picturesque. So that is romanticized for a lot of reasons, and I think also beckons to call. I mean, we don't get a chance to see new buildings that look intentionally like 500-year-old buildings. And I think that it's kind of a nice juxtaposition because Santa Fe was the second oldest established development in the United States. Well, back then, just the Americas, when the conquistadors came. So there was a big Spanish and colonial and territorial kind of influence on the cities and the plazas here still, and old Spanish and Portuguese influences. So that's it's nice that we've maintained that kind of language and dialogue in our architectural designs.
That's cool. It has a unique thing that they understand what's unique about it, and it's not trying to be someone else. That's really cool. I think some cities some cities don't have it like some cities it's like they're too self-conscious. They're always trying to
Right.
figure out a new this, a new that. So that's really
Right.
cool to hear that, and it's definitely attracting me to get out there at some point. I know there's like the tourism growing for that.
Well, you have a place to stay whenever you do come out here, so you're always welcome.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Real estate is going to be a really good opportunity. I've seen some architect developers, architects who sort of totally in it, some who are just like consulting. What do you think the path would be for architects who might see that as the opportunity they want to pursue?
We briefly talked about this, but architecture is a business, right? So it itself is a business, acquiring new talents and new projects. So I would say it translates very easily into real estate because real estate is a vital component for architecture to be built in the first place. So whether it's the architecture firm determining the site, there is always a site being recommended or established for a particular project. So I love about the idea of how architecture could eventually integrate with real estate, because at that point you can become more intentional about, hey, we want that site, let's acquire it for this type project, versus kind of the opposite, where maybe a city or a municipality is directing, or a client is directing the architect. The architect can be a little more intentional about how they go about creating that project or environment that they're wishing to create. So I see that as a very practical and maybe necessary thing for architecture firms to consider integrating real estate in their business models and their practices.
What would be the biggest challenge for an architect to like maybe more fully embrace that connection?
Difficulty is, I guess, it could be a number of difficulties, to be honest. But ultimately, you're every time you're opening yourself up to another, service, as the architect, it's are we going to work well with this person? Is this somebody who we can trust? What is the knowledge skill set of this person? Unfortunately, because of the easier accessibility for people to become a licensed realtor, the experience levels could vary tremendously. So having the ability to place your trust in someone to acquire a piece of property or to help grow the business of the architecture firm in this direction, pursuing real estate or partnership with a real estate company, there really has to be a lot of due diligence and background of understanding of, are we aligned with our philosophies? Is the understanding of their abilities consistent with what we need, out of this endeavor? So I think those are kind of some of the bigger challenges. Is, obviously you're working with somebody new now. Can we get along? Can we understand things? And then also incorporating that timeline into that project scope or into that design idea, because if it's complexity depending on the location and its zoning or ownership status, it can make for a very complex transaction. Sometimes can take up to better part of a decade to complete. And obviously time and resources and energy can be expended for nothing that's going to end up in a fruitful situation. So there's some potential, doomsday-ish scenarios. But the good news is, I think also the benefit would be incorporating someone who understands the neighborhoods, the areas well, the piece of the land correctly, and how to maneuver those transactions in a quicker timeline will benefit the architecture firm to produce a better project and quicker.
Where can people learn more about sort of what the Aceves Group does? And I guess sort of where can people sort of, maybe if someone wants to be into real estate, or even if people are now sort of clients, where can they find you, and sort of what things are upcoming for the Aceves Group?
So first and foremost, I work with a brokerage here in Albuquerque called the M Real Estate Group. It's the mrealestategroup.com as their website. My direct website is called buyingnewmexico.com. So it's all one word spelled out. And that's where you can find my personal bio and bios of our team. And what's captivating about the Aceves Group is, we are a customized service. We understand the process in its totality, but we customize our responses, our communication with each individual client. So we're a small enough group to where we can, do those things very customized approaches to each client's needs and desires. I mean, it's a little bit mystifying, even though we buy on average about 6 homes in our lifetime. Each time is a significant monumental occurrence, right? We're changing addresses, we're moving. And that experience of almost being nomadic is kind of cool. So understanding those frustrations and the significance of that move is, I think, what helps separates us from maybe someone who just is able to help, sign contracts or, show enough houses till you make a decision. So we understand there's a lot more that goes behind those decisions and kind of the events that are occurring in your timeline of being alive. So we at the Aceves Group are just always looking forward to reaching out to new clients. Most of our clients are actually here in the Albuquerque area, and we've expanded recently into Arizona and California as far as our referral groups. So we're working with a lot of individuals coming into our state through those other connections we've made. And that's what we're doing. We're constantly growing and making new friends and having new clients and helping them achieve their home buying and home selling needs.
That's awesome. And I definitely will definitely promote that, because I think that's, the idea is even learning about New Mexico. It's like people are trying to leave some of their states for different reasons over the last few years. So maybe that'll be a new home, a new opportunity. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Appreciate it, Brandon. Thank you for your time. And
It was excellent speaking with Santiago Aceves and hearing his inspiring journey to build a legacy from architecture into the world or pioneering real estate. You can find Santiago and his firm online at buyingnewmexico.com or by searching for the Aceves Group. If you are interested in learning more about the newest design software and techniques, visit our sponsor Iamthestudio at Iamthestudio.com and sign up with our newsletter Design Insights Weekly. In our next episode, we'll be reviewing the 5 best laptops for architects and the features you need to run the most popular software. Be sure to check it out. Architecture Beyond is an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This is our first series of episodes, and we're interested in your feedback. Are there some topics you would like to hear, or are you interested in being a guest? Go to Iamthestudio.com and click on Arch Beyond in the menu for more information. This has been Brandon and the Architecture Beyond crew. Catch you in the next episode.